Yes.
It's impossible to properly speakers. Oh, sorry. Thank you. If you have a small room where it's impossible to create that distance of 1 metre from the side walls and the back, given the problems of broadband absorption, what do you do? Because you're always going to have those annoying reflections. So do you have any thoughts or suggestions on the way to go with that?
Yeah, I mean, you point out very rightly that these requirements that I have, certain distances from the wall, sort of dictate a minimum room size, right? And if you're below that size there, what do you do then? What I found is that an omnisource, not a dipole, but an omnisource is surprisingly benign in terms of that this 1 meter distance that I talked about. You can violate that. The symmetry is still an important factor. I have a situation like this in one of my rooms there where I have set up the Plutos there, where I cannot set it up symmetrically. It just is no way. And the whole zone stage is sort of pulled over to one side, and you have to set unsymmetrical to get a more uniform spread. And it's also not the distance from the wall behind it. But other than that, it works quite well. And the other requirement is you may want to sit closer than your equilateral triangle, actually closer than that. So the loudspeakers become more like giant headphones. Right. The other thing is when you have an omnisource, you don't have to go very far from the source for it to be truly omni. Like this Pluto that I showed you there, when I make measurements, I make a frequency response measurement 6 inches from the tweeter, okay, which is not that much. Then I double the distance to 12 inches, okay, double that again to 24 inches. And just as you would expect, the response drops 6 dB every step. Every time I double the distance. And the frequency response stays the same. It's the same response. So you can get really close to this thing, and it basically becomes a giant headphone.
Thank you.
But without the in-the-head localization type issues. Yeah.
I just wondered if you'd done any experiment with dipoles, for example. I'm thinking of the quad electrostatics. Have you done any work with more exotic transducers, or what's your feeling on this?
No, I haven't done, but I have to say that the electrostatics, in particular the quad ESL 63, has been sort of an inspiration to me for a long, long time. And I always thought, geez, there's something right about this speaker. I don't know what it is. You know, this goes back. Today I think I know what it is. But the fascination with it, but it also has limitations, as you know. It's very touchy sweet spot in the dynamic range, and so it's somewhat limited. And I always said, gosh, can't we do better than that, you know, overcome those limitations without losing what is obviously something really right about them. And I think can be done. The problem, or let me add this, I think that the quad is an exception, the ESL 63. There are many large panel type electrostatics or magnetic type, planar type speakers. They are well known to be touchy in terms of setup in the room. And I think that is because inherently they have a very non-uniform polar response, despite what people may want to tell you. Okay, even the ESL 63 is not really that pretty when I've seen measurements that were done. I think it was either Archimedes or Eureka project that used the ESL 63 there. But still, they have enough of the right stuff to point the direction. Yeah.
I found your observations very interesting, but I'd like to add some more to support wall mounting when you have to use wall mounting for loudspeakers. This business of you learning the acoustic of a room, and you can then remove it from your consciousness and listen to the reproduced music. the first impression of wall mount speakers is that there is a wall attached to the soundstage and that you don't hear depth beyond the wall. But in fact, you learn the wall sound within about 20 minutes. And if you continue listening, the perception of the wall begins to fade, and you start to recreate the original soundstage impression in your brain. So you can process out the wall boundary. I agree there is an initial unmistakable unnaturalness about wall mounting, but if the speakers are designed for that boundary and provide a reasonably even spectral response on and off axis, then the results can be satisfying. It's a learned experience, but is not one to be dismissed entirely.
Okay, that's very interesting that you say that. I have to say I have not built in-wall speakers, so I can speak only from what I have heard. You know, when
No, I've had to design some which have to survive wall mounting, and it is possible.
Yeah. Now, the observation that you make there, it takes 20 minutes or so to adapt to this there. I noticed in comparing the two types of speakers that I had here, when you switch between them instantly, one should not make any judgments or so, because it takes, well, I could actually sense how something is happening here to sort of adapt to a new situation, because clearly the two speakers illuminate the room differently there. And it's sort of like the processor here between the ears has to change its algorithm or something so that I can make a valid, before I can make a valid comparison. So there's definitely a learning process. There's definitely, you walk into any room, there's immediately a learning process. We not think about it, but we learn about the room acoustics. And we process it, and we can then, from then on, filter it out. So that's interesting, the observation there.
Follow.
Yeah.
And I was right at the back. When I first arrived, I couldn't distinguish the quartet from the acoustic. And that took about 40 minutes.
Yeah.
After 40 minutes, I began to forget the cathedral acoustic, except as a background, and I could concentrate on this distant quartet.
Yeah.
Way buried.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's absolutely phenomenal what we are able to do there, and I think we should really exploit it. You know, like consciously design for it or so.
Siegfried, I've got a rhetorical question really, and that is anybody going to listen this time? Because this message, the message that you should have full spectrum reflections, is not a new one.
Yeah.
People have been saying this for 30 years and more. I've actually brought a quote with me from an article that appeared in the JES by Daniel Queen in May 1979.
Yeah.
And it was entitled The Effect of Loudspeaker Radiation Patterns on Stereo Imaging and Clarity.
Yeah.
And he said, part of his conclusion was, the data suggests that to achieve good imaging and clarity, loudspeaker designs for home music listening rooms must consider directivity not from the standpoint of audience coverage, but from the standpoint of uniformity of the intensity of arriving reflections with respect to frequency. Now, I did some experiments along the lines you hinted at with using thin foam absorbers on the side of the room, which was supposed to improve the sound, and of course didn't in the 1980s. And I've been preaching the message of needing full bandwidth reflections, particularly sidewall reflections, in UK hi-fi magazines ever since then. Maybe it's because I've been saying it, but I haven't noticed anybody taking any notice. Apart from, I mean, there are a few people who apparently have, not due to what I've said, I think, but because they sat in on the experiments that you've referred to that took place in a Technical University of Denmark anechoic chamber when KEF and B&O were simulating room reflections with speakers.